This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A recap of 2025 and expectations for 2026 for the cattle market with Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University livestock economist, begins today's show. Keeping the show rolling is Sandra Wick from K-State's Post Rock District as she explains how communication between producers, extension agents, and specialists happens to help with questions. Drew Ricketts, K-State wildlife specialist, ends the show as he discusses how raccoons are showing more traits that signal domestication. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Happy New Year.
Derrell, as you are our first cattle market for 2026, first we want to take a look back at 2025, and what's your recap you have when we think about the cattle market?
You know, there's a number of things that come to mind when you think about 2025. I mean, obviously, we continued the big cattle market run that really, this was the third year. It started in late 2022. And so if you look at all the prices, we ended the year with feeder cattle, fed cattle, box beef, all well above a year earlier levels. So we continued that run. I think we kind of took the edge off of it a little bit in the fourth quarter. We had a lot of challenges, a lot of external influences that caused a big market correction. And then, that was in October, November. December was mostly recovery from the correction. And in some cases, if you look at calf markets, we pretty well got back to where we were at the highs in early October by the end of the year. So really picked it up and completed that. Feeder cattle didn't quite get back there. Feeder cattle were sort of hurt the worst, I think, during the correction, if you will, but they did recover significantly, as did fed cattle. And so, we're kind of wrapping up the year. Again, we're well above where we were a year ago. So even with the correction in mind, it was still an awfully good year. But those kind of volatility that comes with those corrections are really a challenge for producers, particularly if they happen to get caught marketing cattle right in the middle of those things. And that's one of the lessons here is we've got high prices, but we also have a lot of volatility. And that's been kind of one of the themes of 2025, I think.
When we think of those corrections, depending on what it's correcting from, does that change the amount of time it takes to get that correction done?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in most cases, the cattle market fundamentals are very strong underneath this thing. So the market is I've said this a couple of times last year, the market's pretty bulletproof. But it's not bomb-proof. And once we got into the fourth quarter, of course, we had such a run up. So especially from a futures market standpoint, we had a lot of futures traders that were sort of looking for an opportunity for a correction. And that's just a healthy thing that markets do. They have a big run one way or the other, whether it's down or up. Then they do a correction, which gives people a chance to kind of square off those positions, take some money off the table, and sort of reset themselves. And so the market was ready for a correction. And then we had a lot of political stuff that came in from the outside in the fourth quarter. And that's not really helpful. And it did certainly make the correction bigger than it needed to be. And it took longer to recover from. Again, we're still in some sense in recovery, although if the politics stays quieted down, then, we will move on from here. So most of the time, these corrections in this kind of a market are very short-lived, a week or two, couple, 3 weeks. In this case, it was a few weeks. I would say, the bulk of the impact of the fourth quarter stuff was over in about 6 or 7 weeks. And so, again, we're still not fully recovered depending on which market you look at. But that external stuff can drag on. Of course, you can get repeated. That's what happened was we had a whole series of things. So it wasn't just one thing. If it had been any one of those, it wouldn't have lasted very long. But when you sort of pile on with a lot of stuff, then it created a bigger correction, and it takes a little bit longer to recover from.
From where we're sitting right now at the beginning of January, what are things looking like?
We're starting off 2026 again with the same story in some sense. The cattle market fundamentals have really not changed. Again, cattle prices across the board, box beef prices, retail consumer prices are all still well above a year ago, and we're still sort of, working on this story, if you will. Now we're going to be anticipating, by the end of January to get annual inventory numbers and some things that will kind of set the stage for the next year in terms of those numbers. But it's pretty clear from the slaughter data and so on that we did not start any significant amount of heifer retention in 2025, maybe a little bit. Some of the indicators kind of turned a little bit at the end of the year based on the slaughter numbers, but they really didn't. They didn't move far enough to say that we're very far into it. So I think we're still telling the same story in some sense that we started a year ago with, and that is we're looking for indications that we are responding to the market in terms of high prices and starting to do those things that will eventually put a top in the market. At this point in time, we have not done that. So we're still expecting to move higher as we go forward.
Do you think we'll see that top of the market in 2026?
I really don't at this point. I think, given the amount of time it takes, and again, given those indicators, now again, we'll see what USDA tells us at the end of the month officially as far as the beef replacement heifer inventory and even the beef cow herd inventory. I think 2025 might have been the bottom for the beef cow herd inventory, but that's only because cow slaughter dropped enough for the third year in a row to sort of allow us to stabilize at the low level that we're at. So we might see just a very fractional increase in the beef cow herd inventory, but it's coming from the cow side. You don't rebuild off of that. You can stop the liquidation, if you will, and that's what I think we've done. But you don't really start any herd rebuilding without heifer retention, and there's still no indication that we've really done that. So if we start that process, it's probably going to continue to be slow rather than really aggressive. And if that's the case, then we're going to continue this story, and we probably won't put a top in this market even in 2026.
Besides heifer retention, anything else you're keeping your eye on for the year?
Yeah, I haven't mentioned demand very much, but obviously the key to all of this through the last 3 years has been strong demand to match the supply fundamentals that provide the support for higher prices. We continue to see strong demand, but we continue to watch it as well. We're at record levels. We're kind of in uncharted territory. So there's a lot of uncertainty about, whether or not at some point we do kind of exhaust the consumer. We haven't really seen any real indication of that yet. Now, I think we're probably going to move with a little slower pace in 2026. And some of that's going to come from the fact that it's going to be harder and harder to push prices higher at the consumer level. But as beef supplies continue to tighten up, beef production fell in 2025. It'll fall again in 2026. And so with tighter supplies, we're probably going to see even higher prices. But from a retailer's perspective, it's going to get harder and harder to push those higher prices off to consumers. So there'll be less of that. And that means there'll be more of a margin squeeze for the retailers, probably, because the tight supplies are going to keep box beef prices high. Retail prices will go up, but not as much. Fed cattle prices will go up, but box beef prices won't go up as much to match that. So all the way back down the chain, you see this margin squeeze that I think probably gets a little more pronounced as we go forward. And all of that means that while cattle prices will continue to go up, probably at a little slower pace, but everything above that will go up even slower yet, if you will, kind of leveling out a little bit as we approach a peak in this market.
So when we look back, we've talked about some plant closures and reducing how much beef production is because of tight supplies. And so as we look forward in the next few years, if we do start to rebuild our herd, will we have enough space if we're slaughtering more animals?
That's an interesting question. We haven't talked about that much yet. With the announcement that Tyson made in November to completely close one of the Nebraska plants and cut back on one of the Texas plants. And right now, there's still excess capacity. Cattle numbers are tight enough that we still don't have enough packing capacity for the number of, or we still have excess packing capacity, I should say, relative to the number of cattle that we're producing in the industry. But someday we will rebuild to some extent. And as we do that, there will come a time when we will then saturate that capacity. And of course, there's also a risk going forward, depending on what happens in 2026, that we might actually lose some more capacity. It's a distinct possibility. It's not a prediction at this point that I would have, but it's certainly possible that we could see some other market players make some adjustments as well. And all of that to say that this is to get through the tight supplies, which are going to be with us for at least a couple, 3 more years at a minimum. But there probably will come a day when we will get to a point where then we don't have enough capacity and we'll face that issue. I think that's probably several years down the road. We're probably talking the end of the decade before anything like that would be an issue at this point.
Anything else happening in meat proteins that is important to think about?
Well, we haven't talked much about trade. Trade will be important as we go into 2026. I mean, it always is. We saw, the market response in general combined with some of the political things that have happened. Exports continued to decrease in 2025, particularly China. And that's a big market that we didn't talk much about it in 2025 because we had such dynamic domestic markets and we were setting record high prices. And yet we did that in the face of losing a very important or almost losing a very important export market. So as we go forward, those issues will become more important. And of course, there was a lot of talk about beef imports last year. We're bringing in additional beef and we normally utilize some additional beef to support our processing beef supplies or ground beef market largely. That will continue going forward. There will probably continue to be some discussion about that as we go forward. So the trade issues may play a little bit higher profile in terms of our discussion in 2026, but they don't really change what's happening or the trajectory that we're on. But I do think we'll probably become a little more aware of some of those trade issues, particularly on the export side.
Derrell, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
You bet. Happy to be here.
That was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing how communication works for producers, extension agents, and specialists. And then to talk about it from their perspective, we're joined by crop production agent in K-State's Post Rock District, Sandra Wick. Sandra, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm glad to share with you today.
Sandra, before we hop into the communications aspects of extension, can you first just tell us, when you think of extension, what do you think of?
The first thing that I think of is helping people help themselves. We provide the information. We don't make their decisions, but we provide that research-based information so they can make the most educated decisions about whatever it is, their cropping systems, livestock production, nutrition, whatever their questions might be.
And when we talk with a lot of specialists here on Agriculture Today, towards the end, we always say, if they have more questions, reach out to their local extension agent. So as a local extension agent, Sandra, what does that mean for you when producers do reach out?
I really like that personal contact, that personal interaction with producers and farm families, whether it be, I especially enjoy them just stopping by the office and just chit-chatting. I mean, sometimes they just stop by just to visit. They really don't have a question. But once you develop that personal working relationship and they're in the courthouse, it makes a difference. We're in the courthouse, so we get a lot of that traffic, and they just want to stop by and chat. And then if they have a question, of course, and then they'll stop. But what really is exciting is when they come back again after that first question, that first contact, and then they come back again and ask again. That proves to me that we're a trusted resource for them.
And how does you talking with your producers help you gain more knowledge to help maybe share even more knowledge within your district?
If you know, I was a strong FFA and 4-H member, so doing to learn, learning to do. So you learn by your experiences. You may make mistakes, but that's the best people to go to as the producers. And if they actually something worked in their field and you can show them really makes a difference, not just telling them. So yes, I work with producers, network with them, and I'll even say, well, I talked to so-and-so and it worked for them in that area. So a lot of times that works too.
If we're thinking about talking from the producer to the extension agent to the specialist, how does that flow of communication work?
I am to admit, and I've been an extension agent for over 35 years. I started when I was 12, right? Anyway, I am not afraid to admit I don't know the answer. And I think that's key to getting that honest working relationship with producers. But like you said, we have specialists that's what they do day in and day out. So they are a trusted resource too. And producers know that. And I say, I don't know the answer to that, but let me check with so and so in Manhattan to see if they have some other experiences or some recent research that they've done. So we all work together. It's all interconnected.
And when we're thinking about reaching out to so and so, is sometimes that another extension agent?
Absolutely, because we all kind of have our strengths and weaknesses. So if I know that somebody else has their master's degree in something very specific like insect management or something in crops, I will definitely reach out to another extension agent. And in turn, they may reach out to you as well because you have strengths and weaknesses. So like I said, we're all on the same team here.
And you mentioned about people coming into your office and chit-chatting with you there, but do you ever take the time to go out to them?
Absolutely. Farm visits are critical. And then even go down to the coffee shop. When I first started, when I wasn't a crop production agent, I would even go to the sale barn, on the sale barn day. You have to go where they are sometimes because that's getting that interpersonal working relationship with them so they can trust you and come in and get that information from us.
And thinking of those relationships, what do you see as some really key or important factors to hopefully building a strong working one?
Okay, I think, first of all, admitting that you don't know all the answers. I think that makes us human. And then I think that's something critical as well. Following back up with them and being very prompt on answering their questions. A lot of times they come in here or I'm not here, I'm out on a farm visit or I'm at a meeting. And so getting back to them in a timely manner, I think is very important too. And all those components kind of go together in building that working relationship that works.
For our farmers and ranchers, if they do have an issue or concern, or really anyone, because Extension is there for all 105 counties, what information is important for them to bring into you to hopefully have a successful problem-solving session?
The more details they can bring in, the better it is. Because if we know all the information, all the factors involved, and then we can try to come up with a solution or some information for them to help them solve what other problems that they may be having.
A lot of times we also see a lot of workshops going in through counties and districts. What makes you decide what workshops or learning opportunities you're going to provide to your producers?
Okay, that's a great question because that's probably one of the hardest things as an extension agent to come up with topics on what our workshops need to be about. So a lot of times we'll base it on like what questions I get in the office. Sometimes we'll send out a survey because we do a weekly, actually, electronic newsletter to producers. We probably have over 400 producers on that listserv. So sometimes questions will come in on that or comments on that. So it's really the responses from producers that help us come up with these topics. And then any other hot topics that specialists, they get questions too on a lot. So we're here for the producers. So we also have program development committees. Each district or counties have that where it's producers on those committees. So they help us come up with the issues too. So we're all grassroots. And so it's important that we get input from them too to come up with these programs.
Sandra, you mentioned counties and districts, and you're currently in the post-rock district. And so when we look at districts and counties, do you see any differences in how they function?
I was in a single county for 20 years before I joined a district. So I kind of know the advantages and disadvantages of both. As a county, you're pretty much localized, and it's much easier, I think, for beginning agents once you've lived there for a while because you go to ball games with them, you see them at the grocery store, you may go to church with them. So it's easier to form that working relationship. I have 5 counties. So it's a challenge in order to meet them, get a personal relationship with them. Yes, I have, maybe a couple meetings or something a year, but just doing that doesn't really fill the bill in order to get that working relationship. So you have to go out and above and maybe give them a call, give them a follow-up or something. Well, Ask them about your newsletter if they're getting that newsletter. So I even did one year, I went to Lincoln County because they're the furthest away. I went there at the coffee group that comes in the mornings, like at 6 o'clock in the morning at one of the coffee shops for the whole month. It was like a Tuesday. And so that kind of helped too, in a way. So you got to be very creative and think of different ways that you can have contact with some of the producers of the counties you don't live in.
If producers have never utilized some resources at K-State, what's your recommendation or how can they go about getting started if they do have issues or concerns or questions?
Go to and contact your local county extension office. If you don't know where that is, it's usually in the courthouse, but there are some offices that are not located in the courthouse. And I hate to say go online, but Google it. And so if you just type in Smith County Extension Office, it will come up that way, but it may be in the Post Rock district because, as you know, close to half of our half of our counties are in a district now. So come on in, give us a try. We will try to help you in any of the areas that you might need help with. And if we don't know, we will get you the resources that will help you.
Sandra, anything else you want to share?
I just have enjoyed working with Extension and especially working with the producers and farm families of North Central Kansas.
Sandra, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
All righty. Well, thank you so much.
That was crop production agent in K-State's Post Rock District, Sandra Wick. As always, you can find more information about K-State Extension at the state level by going to their website, www.ksre.k.su.edu. Of course, I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. If you are looking for things on a more local level, you can find your local extension office. Before I cut to a break, as we have started the new year, I would like to remind you about K-State's Department of Agricultural Economics conferences, which are titled K-State Ag Profitability Conferences, Making Sense of a Shifting Ag Economy. There are a few that are taking place here soon. The first is January 13th in Mankato, January 14th in Colby, January 15th in Hayes, February 3rd in Garden City, February 4th in Kingman, and February 5th in Erie. Registration is different for these events depending on where you're going, so if you'd like to find more information on this, you can go to agmanager.info, and I will also link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts as he talks about raccoons having more traits of domestication. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show discussing raccoons being domesticated with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Shelby.
Drew, bringing some attention to some research about are raccoons being domesticated and who has done this research?
Yeah, so recently there's been a fair bit of publicity. I've heard on radio programs, I've seen it on TV and on social media quite a bit about a study that was conducted by some researchers at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where they were looking at populations of raccoons in different areas and looking for signs of what we would call domestication syndrome. And so when we think about animals becoming domesticated from the wild species that they started out as, there are a number of traits that they can develop that basically are adaptations to allow them to be less fearful of humans, maybe, or to allow humans to be less fearful of them, that facilitate the process of those critters living in close proximity to humans, becoming white, like domesticated poultry that we see. That's an example of this. Or a smaller brain, maybe less sharp teeth or less long teeth. And the characteristic that they specifically looked at in this study was rostrum length, which would basically be the length of the snout.
And do they see a difference for the length of that snout, whether in rural areas or urban areas?
They actually did, and it's not quite as simple as that. When we look at census data, there are a bunch of different classifications as far as human population from urban to rural, and it's sort of this gradient, and it goes from 1 to 9. So a Category 9 county would have 5,000 or fewer people in it, and it would not be adjacent to a large metropolitan area. What they considered to be urban counties was a class 1 through 3, and that sort of lines up with what we would expect to be a metropolitan zone. And these are the most urban areas. And so we're talking about having 250,000 people or more living in a county to classify as what they called urban. And they wanted to control for some adaptations that might be associated with animals living in warmer or colder places. So they included plant hardiness zone as one of the things that they were looking at as well. And long story short, they found that plant hardiness zone did have an impact, but that was more something that they controlled for. So when they controlled for plant hardiness zone, they found that raccoons living in the most urban areas had a 4% shorter snout than raccoons that lived in rural areas. And that's a small percentage of a difference, but it was a significant difference. And so it's some evidence that raccoons that live in urban environments are developing some adaptations that might facilitate them living closer to humans.
So this doesn't mean that people should go out and pick up raccoons and make them their pet?
Absolutely not. And that's one of the things that I've been a little bit concerned about as I've seen the publicity around this is some of the things people are saying or putting out there basically make it sound like raccoons are becoming domesticated. And while they're showing some morphological characteristics that show that that process may be starting, raccoons should still be viewed as wild animals. It doesn't make sense for us to go try and pet them or capture them or anything like that. And really, intentional feeding of wildlife is also something that we need to be really careful about, especially with a critter like a raccoon. The more that we allow them to be comfortable associating humans with food, the more likely we are to have a negative interaction or an interaction where, a raccoon might act aggressively towards us or something because they're trying to get us to give them what they want from a food standpoint. And so just remember that some researchers have found some traits associated with domestication, but that doesn't mean that raccoons that we see in urban environments are domesticated.
Drew, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.